In a completely unexpected turn of events, Judge Tanya Chutkan has given the Trump team until November 10th to respond to a request filed by NBC Universal to permit video and audio coverage by the media of Trump's federal trial in Washington, D.C. I should note that federal trials are historically not televised, but NBC is arguing that an exception should be made given the public interest in this trial. In its application to the court, NBC wrote, "The American public has an extraordinary interest in seeing and hearing this trial of former President Trump. The indictment alleges that he pursued unlawful means of discounting legitimate voters and subverting the election results of the 2020 presidential election. In other words, the indictment claims that as the sitting president of the United States, Mr. Trump sought to subvert the peaceful transfer of presidential power and the foundational principles of our nation's democracy. These alleged efforts have been the subject of congressional hearings and an impeachment proceeding, both of which were televised live. Mr. Trump is a candidate for the Republican nomination for the presidency. His trial in this case will be the subject of pervasive news coverage, real-time commentary from across the political spectrum, including perhaps from Mr. Trump himself, and countless conversations among American voters as the presidential primary elections unfold alongside the trial. Yet unless this court permits it, only the very small number of people who can access the physical courtroom will ever be able to see and hear the trial for themselves, and everyone else will instead have to rely on second and third-hand coverage and cold transcripts. Civil and criminal proceedings have been televised routinely for decades, pursuant to rules in many state courts, with no prejudice to any party or to the administration of justice. If ever a trial were to be televised, this one should be for the benefit of American democracy. Of course, televising the trial for the benefit of American democracy will be precisely why the Trump team will do everything in its power to ensure that it's not televised. Think about it. Right now, Trump and his allies will be able to distort what happens in the courtroom with impunity in the hermetically sealed ecosystem that is right-wing media. It doesn't matter what happens in court, they will lie and say whatever benefits them politically because they have no shame and will never allow anyone to report the truth if it hurts them in politics. But if there's actual footage from the courtroom exposing what's happening, it'll be leagues more difficult for them to paint the picture that they'd otherwise want to paint. Will it comport with reality? Not at all. But has that stopped them before? Not in the slightest. I discussed this exact issue with my Legal Breakdown co-host Glenn Kirshner, and he explained why there's a better than 50% chance it will happen, not just from a moral perspective, but a legal one too.
I actually think there is a better than 50% chance. Here's why I say that. You can make the equitable arguments, right? The equitable arguments, not arguments based on the law, would be, listen, this is the most important criminal trial in our nation's history. I feel comfortable saying that. And the American people really have not only a right to know, but a need to know, because they're going to be making their life decisions based on what happens in the courtroom. They're going to be making their voting decisions based on what happens in that courtroom. And we need to see this trial, because if we don't, you know what's going to happen? Donald Trump's defense lawyers are going to step to the cameras at the end of every trial day, and they're going to put disinformation, propaganda, and outright lies into the public square. They're going to talk about how, oh, again today, the prosecution's evidence fell apart, proving once again, this is a witch hunt. This is political interference. You know what Jack Smith's team of prosecutors will say at the end of every day?
Nothing.
Nothing. They will say nothing, because they're not permitted to speak about a trial while the trial is still ongoing.
Which creates a vacuum that's going to be entirely filled by Trump and his allies.
And it will be a one-sided fight. It will be, the DOJ fighting with one arm tied behind its back. That's another equitable reason that the American people should get to see the evidence with their own eyes, rather than relying on what anybody says about it, including mainstream media. We need to see it for ourselves. Here's the legal reason, the statutory reason that I believe cameras may have to go into the courtroom. There's something called the Crime Victims' Rights Act. It's the Victims' Bill of Rights. It's a federal law, and it gives victims statutory rights in court proceedings. Now, you might say, well, who are the victims here? This is the beauty of it, and I expect we may even see a legal suit filed along these lines. The courts have decided that in voter fraud cases, particularly things like conspiracy to deprive people of their voting rights. Sound familiar? It should. That's count 4 of Donald Trump's indictment in Washington, D.C. The courts have said regarding that crime, the voters are the victims. Well, guess what? The Crime Victims' Rights Act gives we the people, the American voters, the statutory victims, the right not to be excluded from the courtroom, the right not to be excluded from the trial proceedings. If the trial is not televised, we will all be excluded from the proceedings. That is not a stretch of the law. That is a heartland argument that is supported by the Crime Victims' Bill of Rights. It's paragraph number 3 in the 10 rights that are enumerated in that federal law. So I think we're going to see a groundswell, both equitable and legal, for cameras in the courtroom. And I kind of like the odds of cameras ending up in the courtroom at the end of the day.
And of course, if this application is approved, then the DC trial would become the second Trump trial to be televised. We already know that the Fulton County, Georgia trial will be televised, with Judge McAfee saying that the use of cell phones and laptops will not disrupt the administration of justice, and that all parties and spectators are allowed to use recording devices. It's also why we've been able to watch as Trump's former attorneys have pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate.
Do you understand that the recommendation in this particular case as to count 15, conspiracy to commit filing false documents, is 5 years to be served on probation, a $5,000 fine, and that I believe you're asking the court to treat you as a first offender. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm sorry, $5,000 restitution. You understand that?
Yes.
And do you understand also special conditions of the probation is that you complete 100 hours of community service?
Yes.
And that you write an apology letter to the citizens of the state of Georgia?
Which I have, yes.
Yes. And that you truthfully testify at all hearings and trials involving co-defendants in this matter, that you have no communication with co-defendants, witnesses, or the media until all cases have been resolved against all co-defendants.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to address the court. As an attorney who is also a Christian, I take my responsibilities as a lawyer very seriously, and I endeavor to be a person of sound moral and ethical character in all of my dealings. In the wake of the 2020 presidential election, I believed that challenging the results on behalf of President Trump should be pursued in a just and legal way. I endeavored to represent my client to the best of my ability. I relied on others, including lawyers with many more years of experience than I, to provide me with true and reliable information, especially since my role involved speaking to the media and to legislators in various states. What I did not do, but should have done, Your Honor, was to make sure that the facts the other lawyers alleged to be true were in fact true. In the frenetic pace of attempting to raise challenges to the election in several states, including Georgia, I failed to do my due diligence. I believe in and I value election integrity. If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump in these post-election challenges.
So as we await a decision as to whether this federal trial will be televised, just remember, when Donald Trump inevitably cries foul, it is because he knows that the truth isn't on his side. He can't allow his supporters to see what actually happens in the courtroom because he needs to be able to lie and distort and obfuscate, which ironically enough is the same issue that landed him in this trial to begin with. In the same way that Trump manipulated his supporters into thinking that a free and fair election was rigged, he's up to the exact same tricks by preparing to manipulate those same supporters into thinking that he is the victim in a trial that seeks to hold him accountable for his own crimes. Although I guess we shouldn't be surprised, because when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.